Go. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm on. So we're going to do a little bit of review, especially if some of you weren't here last week, although it was recorded. And I do have the link if you would like to look at it. And they'll be recording this week's as well. Also, I know a few of you asked about last week's handout, which was lessons 1 and 2 from the Bible study. Today, we're just doing lesson 3. I don't have those with me, but I will bring them here in the future, and I'll try to have some from each of the weeks available. So if anybody has some, needs one, or wants to give one to a friend, you're certainly welcome to. So anyway, Handel lived during the period of the Enlightenment. What can any of you share about what the Enlightenment was?
From last week, it was rationality, reason, science, but diseases.
Wow.
She took notes.
For you.
So it was really about, a time when people began to think about things, science, and it was a period of discovery, but it was not societally a good period to live in. People were very sick. I don't know if it was really during the plague, but there was a lot of sickness, a lot of death. Many parents did not see their children live to adulthood. So it was a really tough time. Government was a mess. Government was a mess. They didn't like the king and everything else. It was warring in society all the time. It was just not a comfortable time to live in. Charles Jensen was looking, why did Charles Jensen look to create the Messiah? What was he looking for?
Relief. He was depressed.
He was depressed, yes. He was very, very depressed, and he was looking for something to dig himself out of that hole. And he was we're going to listen a little bit to a clip later on today more about Charles Jensen, just to give you a fuller picture. But he was very, very rich, wanted for nothing, didn't have to work, read a lot, wrote a lot, had all kinds of he was wanting for nothing. He had everything he needed around him, but he was severely depressed. He suffered under what we might call today bipolar disorder. And the interesting thing is, I'm going to ask you this in a minute, why do you think he turned so much to the prophecies? So much to the prophecies. We'll think about that. We'll get back to that in a second. So he was looking to the Bible to help pull himself out of this depression. Handel was going through a period where he had written operas. He had been born in Germany. He moved to Italy as a teenager, played in the opera orchestra there, learned all about opera, got himself in the position of writing operas himself, and then eventually he had the opportunity to go visit London, and that's what got him here. And he did successfully have opera performances in London for many, many years. But like other things, the fad of opera began to wane a lot, and he needed still to earn a living. Now, I'm going to stop right there. What do you think, where did musicians find employment to earn a living in Handel's day?
Patrons.
Where? A wealthy patron. A wealthy patron. Where else?
The court. Church.
The church. Yes. The court. Yes. Those were actually the three ways. The court, so you worked for government, or the church, which was often also run by government. In the case of England, of course, the King of England was also the head of the church. So, that was an overlap there. If you didn't have that, you needed a patron. Same thing with artists. The reason you see so much particularly biblical art in churches is because people couldn't read. And so they needed a way to learn these stories. And so that's what all of the art was created for, to help tell those stories. In fact, another good example of that is we have the nativity scene today. The nativity scene was created so that people who couldn't read about the nativity could learn about it visually. And who was responsible for that?
Church.
Yes, who in the church? St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi was the first one to pull together live people and animals and put them out on the lawn and tell the story about the nativity. It all started, you can all blame St. Francis of Assisi. Okay, so anyway, if you were successful as a musician or as a visual artist, you probably had a great patron that you got along with, and also you had a job either in the court or in the church. And so Handel was looking for something to bring more income in. And operas were falling out of favor, and so he came up with this notion of an oratorio. We're going to talk a little bit about that form in a little bit. An oratorio is a biblical story set to music, and that's, of course, what ended up leading to the creation of the Messiah. Okay, so the structure of the Messiah, it was a three-part structure, just like his operas were in 3 acts. You know, once you get in the habit of doing something in a form, you tend to continue in that area. And so he created his operas in 3 acts, and he created the oratorios in 3 acts. Jennens, who, without any help from Handel at all, picked all of the verses that were, and also picked the scenes that would go together to create the story of the Messiah. And he divided those up into the 3 parts and 16 different scenes. Now, each of those scenes is made up of 3 kinds of music. An aria, what's an aria? A solo song. A chorus, I think we all know what a chorus is, or a recitative. What's a recitative?
Talking and music.
It's what?
Talking and music.
Okay, that's very interesting. It's like a declamatory sentence set to music. Unlike the choruses, which have tons of repeats in them, the recitatives are straight sentences. They don't have it. Opera had recitatives, which is where the recitatives in this form came from. They were a way to tell the story and not have it in a chorus or in a solo. Here's an example of a recitative. That's it. That's all there is to it. Okay? And what followed that? An aria. An aria. So now she would elaborate through the aria with repetition on what she was just singing about. So that's what a recitative is. Now, interesting, I couldn't get to sleep one night because I was thinking about the evolution from opera to oratorio, back to opera. This period was long before grand opera. Grand opera was back in Italy. That was the time of Verdi and Puccini. Those are the operas we all remember, that we know. Carmen, Aida, La Bohème, Madame Butterfly, all of those kinds of things are from the era of grand opera, which was over 100 years later, okay? So after that, what happened? What was the next evolution that came along after opera? Anybody have an idea?
After grand opera?
Uh-huh. were still on the stage.
It wasn't vaudeville. I don't know.
In a way, it was. In a way, it was vaudeville. And particularly in England, it would have been music hall. The music hall in England, yeah. Which was a much more raucous kind of thing. That brings one other thing to mind. I'll get off track here. At any rate, so in England, that led into operettas. Who wrote the operettas in England? Gilbert and Sullivan. Operettas were a much lighter story, and in fact, what was the point of operettas? What was the point of Gilbert and Sullivan? Anybody know?
Fun.
Fun, yeah, but satire, exactly. It was a comment on society. It would not play the Kennedy Center today. You get my point? It would be very woke. All right. That reminds me of another story. I was in the business for 40 years, hiring professional artists for series, and one of the groups that I hired 4 different times was a group called Capitol Steps. Anybody heard of Capitol Steps? Yes. Well, I hired them many times. That was a group of Congress aides who came together and actually made fun or made light of, spoofed satire of politics. And it was great until the middle of the teens. And that was no longer funny anymore because our country became too split. And actually, the Capitol Steps had been in business 20 years. They went out of business. They went out of business, all because of what was going on in society. Anyway, back to the operettas. The operettas then led into what? Other operettas. A different kind of operetta, not so much satirical. The Student Prince, Rosalinda, The Merry Widow, all of those kinds of things that were still pretty much what we call sung through. There was no dialogue in them, no dialogue. The reason I mentioned that is because eventually we would get to music with dialogue in it, and that became musical theater. Musical theater has dialogue as well as singing. And so consequently, we get back to recitative, and it was handled different ways depending upon the era and depending upon the musical style that was very popular at that time. All right, enough about that. So here's a little bit more about the structure. Part 1 was all about it was the prophecy of the Messiah and a virgin birth predicted using Old Testament scripture. The Annunciation of the shepherds, the birth of Christ used Luke's gospel. Why? This gets back to the question I raised a minute ago. Why do you think Jennings turned so much to Isaiah? Think about it.
Times were tough then. In Bible times, they were going into, he was telling about the future of the Messiah coming.
Well,
Yes.
there was hope, and he
There was
needed
hope.
hope badly.
Exactly right.
Oh.
It was a period of people were looking for hope. Isaiah was the one who prophesied the coming of the Messiah. And just like Jennings was looking for hope, so were the people who lived back in that era. That's why I think he turned so much to the Old Testament rather than the New Testament, because next week we're going to finish part 1 today. Next week we're going to take all of part 2, and that's the part you seldom hear all of those pieces. Generally, when you hear a condensed version of the Messiah, you hear part 1 and you hear some of part 3. Some of part 3 that has the trumpet shall sound and all of that other good stuff in it. But part 2 deals with the death and resurrection. And we're going to spend one session next time getting through all of that material. Okay, and as I just said, part 2 covers Christ's passion and death, his resurrection and ascension, using both the Psalms and the Old Testament. Part 3 covers the promise of redemption, the day of judgment, victory over sin and death. One other thing that I found interesting is some people who have done a lot of study about the text that Jennings pulled for the Messiah said they were also confused about why he used some verses. And because of that, and this was back in Handel's day, for the benefit of his audiences, Jennings issued a pamphlet explaining the reasons for his choices of Scripture. I don't know if that pamphlet exists anywhere. I've looked for it. I can't find it anywhere. But it was confusing enough to people at that time that he felt he needed to explain it a little further. All right, I want you to pull out your handout sheet for today. And I'd like a volunteer who could read, please, the Isaiah 35, 3 through 6. Yes.
3 to 6.
Yes.
Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are in the fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense, and he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongues of the dumb sing. In the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, thank you. This is the King James Version. Of course, a lot of us today read other versions that are a little bit easier on our ears because the words they use are a little bit more meaningful for us. All right, there's a couple of questions there, and they're up here on the board too. I want you to just look at each one of those. Describe the spiritual and emotional condition of the people that Isaiah is talking to. And the other one is what kind of events will happen to the land and the people God saves. Think about that a couple of minutes. Read back through the scripture. See if you can come up with some answers.
Number one, I think it goes back to the hope that things would change and be better and different.
Right.
And they needed someone like the Messiah to come along and make that happen.
Right. Good. Anybody else? All right. What kinds of events does this suggest will happen?
Enlightenment. The blind will see, the deaf will hear.
If you go back up,
will walk.
if you go back up to the title, it's the miracles.
Oh,
People will be healed. There will be, the blind will see. All right, now let's look at kind of where this gets addressed in Matthew. This is 11, 1 through 6. Somebody else, read this, please. Yes.
Me or someone?
No, you're fine, yeah.
Okay. And it came to pass, when Jesus had made an end of commanding his 12 disciples, he departed thence to teach and to preach in their cities. Now, when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples, and said unto him, Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? Jesus answered and said unto them, Go and shew John again these things which ye do not hear and see. Keep going.
Go ahead.
The blind received their sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he, whoever shall not be offended in me.
Okay, now here the Bible study that we were looking at poses 3 questions. Number 1, John the Baptist had been sent by God to announce to the people of Israel the soon arrival of God's kingdom. What about Jesus' ministry and John's personal situation would raise doubts in John's mind?
Well, John was in prison, but he sent people to ask.
John was in prison. It's interesting. We have a very, very good friend who's in prison right now. And when we go to Ohio next month, we're going to go visit him. And it reminds me about what is said in the Bible about when I was in prison, you visited me. Well, here is John in prison. He can't get out and look at this guy that's supposedly doing all of these things. And so he sends a couple of people out to see. Do you think Jesus was disappointed with John's question?
Are you the one?
Hmm?
He's saying, are you the one, or is there somebody else?
He didn't know. You know, what does it take? What am I looking for?
But he had, when he baptized, when John had baptized Jesus, he had said, this is,
My son.
yeah, this is the Son of God. So he's now questioning after all
Apparently so. Apparently so.
what he's heard.
But we all question.
Yes.
It was sort of an issue of hope again, because he was much more than John would have dreamt.
It's a good point. You know, it was one thing for John to baptize and say, here's the Messiah, but could John believe he did the things that he actually did? Could he heal the sick? Could he make the blind see again? Maybe these were perceptions even to John that he was questioning. Last question that's posed here is, how does Jesus' reply compare with what Isaiah had foreseen about the Messiah? Remember, Isaiah is predicting. Here in Matthew is telling what happened. So it's kind of the before and the after.
It was the fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecy.
It was the fulfillment of the prophecy. The fulfillment of the prophecy. Absolutely. All right, we are going to listen to the piece that Handel wrote from the scripture based on this that Jennings had selected, which comes near the end of part 1. We're just going to take some time and listen to this whole piece today. Think about the words. So that's the first part of this aria. Now we go to another part, Come Unto Me. Okay, something I want you to think about. We'll talk about it next week. How could somebody like Handel, who was not particularly religious himself, write 53 pieces of music in 24 days that moves us the way it does? Think about that. We'll talk about it next week. All right. Now, this first part comes to an end with a chorus based on Matthew 11:28-30, where Jesus invites those who are weary and burdened to come to him for rest, and she mentioned that some in the piece that she just sang, promising that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. In ancient world, a yoke was a wooden frame used to join two oxen, allowing them to share the load while pulling a plow or cart. Jesus uses this as a metaphor for following his teachings and living a Christian life. emphasizing partnership and shared responsibility rather than oppressive labor. The chorus is, his yoke is easy, and I want you to listen to a special technique that I mentioned last time that we would hear this time. Here's the song. Okay, so what is the technique? Enough. What is the technique that you think I'm referring to?
Lots of runs.
Yes.
Embellishment.
How, yeah, the runs, I'm talking about the runs. How did they do them together?
A lot of rehearsals.
There's something else. In the front of each one of those notes, they put an H. That way they can articulate each note and they can put them together. Now, if you listen to it again, you'd probably be able to clue in on that. But that's what helped keep them together. Now, one other thing, Handel would never have heard that piece sung that way. And I don't mean about the technique, I mean the size of the orchestra and the size of the chorus. He didn't write it for that size. His size, here it says, Messiah was originally very modest but mighty. It's composed for a modest orchestra, strings, not a huge section of strings, more like a chamber orchestra. Baroque was the period of chamber music. Chamber meaning music that could be played in a salon or a living room or a palace room or something of that nature. It composed of strings, 2 trumpets, and I'm not talking today's trumpets. Those trumpets had no valves on them. You know herald horns? Those big long herald horns? That's what they were. They had no valves, they could only play a few notes. A timpani and a continuo section. A continuo, I think I mentioned last week, generally is the harpsichord, maybe the organ, and also a bass. So there were no clarinets, there were no trombones or large percussion sections like we hear in later symphonic works. Yet, with this lean ensemble, Handel achieved extraordinary variety from hushed intimacy of He Was Despised to the triumphant blaze of Worthy is the Lamb. Here it goes on to mention the trumpets. They were long, valveless instruments capable only of certain notes in a harmonic series. The continuo was the engine room, a group of instruments, often organ, harpsichord, and cello, that provided harmony and rhythm. This is the interesting part. Handel rewrote the score constantly based on what he could find, what was available. Oboe, bassoon, those kinds of things were added later on. But still, I doubt he ever heard what we just heard. It just was not, it was not the style back then, and he didn't write it necessarily that way. However, it works. So this would have been more the size of the choir and also of the orchestra. The choir was made up of 16 men who also did the solos. Where there's a male solo, they were pulled out of the choir, and 16 choir boys. There were no women. You know, it was that age. Gloria Steinem was not around yet, you know? Sorry to say. Anyway, boys from a choir school, 16 of them, 16 men. The only females were the two female soloists. Christina Maria Avolio was the soprano, and now we get to the scandal. Susanna Zibber.
Now we've spoken about Handel, it's time to turn our attention to the real hero of this story. This, everyone, is Susanna Maria Zibber. Now, she was born in 1714 into a theatrical family. Her brother was the composer Thomas Arne. So she was actually born Susanna Maria Arne. And Arne is the composer of such famous tunes as Rule Britannia and A Hunting We Will Go. A very, very popular composer at the time, not to the same extent, of course, as Handel and Bach, but still a very prominent British composer who has clearly made an impact on popular society. Now, Susanna Zibber, as she would become, was a highly gifted actress and singer, and she gained early fame on the London stage with her particularly beautiful voice. However, her career would be ruined ultimately by scandal due to a highly publicized court case featuring her husband, her lover, and many salacious details of their sordid affair.
There's more to the story, of course, which we'll get to next, but she was very, very popular. Handel knew her because she sang in his operas. She sang in his operas. If you mention, the book that we're using along with this class had 5 people in it that he really did kind of an in-depth study of. Handel was obviously one, Jennens was one, Zibber was one. And here's what the author of the book has to say about that affair.
The premiere, but so Zibber, who was born Susanna Arne, A-R-N-E, was born in a very modest background in Covent Garden. Her father was an upholsterer. Her mother was a midwife. But she had a talent for the stage, and her parents saw this sort of pretty early on. In fact, her father really wanted the whole family to get into show business right at the time that Italian opera was taking off in London. This is the early age of what will eventually become the West End in London, the theater district that's just getting kind of created as the city, as the old city of London is expanding to the west. Handel is in the middle of this world of Italian opera, having immigrated from Germany via, or what would become Germany via Italy at the time. And the Arndt family starts doing their own stage shows, kind of amateurish, family stage shows. And Susanna's father realizes that an even better way of getting into the business is not just to do these sort of amateurish family shows, but to have his daughter marry into the business. And he concocts a kind of relationship between his daughter and a man named Theophilus Cibber. Theophilus was the son of the greatest impresario of the day, a man named Colley Cibber, who was a theater mogul and a poet and a playwright. And so when they get married, from Mr. Arndt's point of view, Susanna's father's point of view, this is like golden. Like now the family has really made it through this kind of dynastic marriage into the theater world. But Theophilus turns out to be an absolute nightmare. I mean, he's a horribly abusive husband. He sleeps his way around the cast, he drinks to excess, and he eventually starts offering what at first are probably just meetings and then take on a kind of sexual dimension between his wife and wealthy young men who will pay his gambling debts and his bar tab. And this is kind of a real low point in Susanna's life, as you can imagine, but not as low as it will become, because she falls in love with one of these guys that she meets in this way, a parliamentarian's son named William Sloper, a very wealthy guy. And Theophilus realizes, oh my God, the fact that his wife is now in love with another man turns out to be an actually very good thing, because he can now sue William Sloper, the man she's having an affair with, for damages. He doesn't want to divorce her, but he can sue this man for alienation of his wife's affection, which he did in 1738 and again in 1739, each time winning a little bit more money from the court. And you can imagine then this very wealthy scene that Theophilus can mine. He could just keep suing his wife's lover over and over and over again, so long as they stay together. But from her point of view, this is obviously devastating. She's ruined. Like, the most intimate details of her life have been aired in a public courtroom. And so she disappeared from the stage for a couple of years and only pitched up again in Dublin in the autumn of 1741, right about the time that Handel is arriving to stage a series of concerts there. He's looking around for singers the following spring to cast in this new piece of music he's going to premiere, and he asks Susanna Cibber to be a member of the cast. And what's so astonishing about her performance at the premiere is that he gives her some of the most moving arias of the piece, including "He was despised, rejected, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief," for anybody who knows the music. And when she sings this, anybody in the audience could have done the kind of gender switch, that she's a person of sorrows, she is acquainted with grief. And it absolutely brings down the house, this person who has suffered beyond belief, who is now singing about the possibility of redemption. And for her, it was a redemption, because she goes on after that to become the most successful, the most well-known, the most highly paid actress of her time.
So that's the story. Very interesting. The solo that he refers to, "He was despised," is in part 2. And we're going to hear a little clip of that next week. One of the other characters, of course, that is in this book is Jennens. And here's a little bit more about Jennens.
Charles Jennens has a claim to be Handel's best, most innovative, most stimulating collaborator. He provided the texts for some of Handel's greatest English works.
He's of course best known as the librettist to Messiah, but he also collaborated with Handel on 3 other oratorios, Saul, Belshazzar, and L'Allegoria Penseroso e di Moderato.
Jennings' life was shaped by 3 major passionate commitments: to his religious faith as a Church of England Protestant, to his politics, he was a political outsider, and to music.
I think Jennings had an instinctive understanding of what Handel did best as a composer, and he clearly was a Handel nut. I mean, he had the largest collection of Handel's music in 18th century England.
He's a man who likes the best in literature. I can tell also that politically something interests him about the nature of kingship, what it is to be royal and what it is to be royal and challenged. But more than that, I find it very difficult to say. He must be therefore a private man, I guess, because he didn't shout about it.
He didn't write for money. He gave Handel the librettos as a gift. He didn't write for glory. All his librettos were anonymous. In a rather extraordinary statement, Jennings spoke of making use of Handel. The idea of a librettist making use of the composer rather than the other way around is interesting. He saw Handel's music as the perfect conduit for his own ideas, both religious and political.
Of course, Jennings is the collaborator of Messiah, which is, without doubt, at least in the English-speaking world, the most famous oratorio of all time. And for that reason, there is a legacy which defines oratorio into the next century.
There's always moments in Messiah, and again I do it so often, but there's always something of relevance to that moment. When I sing, "Why do the nations rage so furiously together?" there's always a headline in the paper that morning of another attack somewhere in the world. You get the feeling that rather than being an Old Testament text that has no relevance to today, that things are happening right now.
Jennings was born into a family of Birmingham ironmasters. By the time Jennings was born, they were extremely wealthy, and Jennings' grandfather had bought an estate at Gopsall. Jennings inherited this estate from his father when he was in his 40s. Wealth allowed Jennings to have no profession, but it's very fortunate for us because it means that he could devote his life to patronage of the arts, which he did on a grand scale. Right at the end of his life, he embarked on one of his most ambitious projects, a complete edition of Shakespeare, the first ever variorum edition of Shakespeare, the plays being published in individual volumes with notes on the page, and that's how modern Shakespeare editions are produced. But in doing so, he got across the current Shakespeare mafia in the form of the leading editor, George Stevens, who made sure that through his media contacts, Jennings's reputation was completely rubbished. And that survived long after Jennings's death, often without any awareness of his philanthropy, his work for Handel, his artistic patronage.
History is always a little bit unkind on librettists, and it's always composers that we remember. But it's fair to say, especially with Jennings, that it was a real collaboration and one of the most interesting relationships in the 18th century.
So I like this piece because I think that generally we only think of Handel when we think of the Messiah, and we don't think about what an enormous role Jennings played, particularly spiritually, in making the Messiah what it is today. All right, that brings us to the end, and for today, yes.
It seemed like we were listening to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in connection with His Yoke is Easy. Kind of a question that relates to Handel being able to do what he did as kind of a warm theologian or believer. I often wonder when I listen to the Tabernacle Choir how all of those people, or whether they all, are really singing from their heart something that relates to the Messiah, promised and then fulfilled. Because Mormonism, as I understand it, doesn't really accept the Christ, the Messiah, as we understand it.
Interesting point. Yeah, interesting point. Which gets back to my question that I raised earlier. How could Handel, in 24 days, write 53 pieces that inspire us so much? And I want you to think about that. We're going to talk about it again next week. I have some ideas, but I'm more interested in what you think. And it's not just Handel. It's anybody who writes music that inspires us. Where does that come from? So think about that. I don't want you to give me an answer right now. I just want you to mull it over a little bit. Anyway, your assignment for next week is, what do these two things have in common? Gulliver's Travels and the Messiah. And you know where to find the answers. Google. All right, thanks for coming today. Next week, part two. Part two. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.